the outline was welcome. Thank you. The outline really was to look at what the purpose of the discussion might be, and I'd proposed that it was to provide an opportunity for regional colleagues to discuss their shared right to information work program, and for the ACIC having agreed one shared initiative, and that's the Australian Information Access Commissioners, and of course the New Zealand Ombudsman being represented on that. Sorry, it's the Association of Information Access Commissioners, which includes Australia and New Zealand. And we have a shared current initiative, which we agreed in November 2022, which was for us to develop opportunities to engage with our Indo-Pacific neighbours and advance the right to access information in ways that assist our Indo-Pacific counterparts, and obviously in the context of mutual respect and learning, that there's a response that enables us to learn as well and to develop some of our understandings. So the background is just by way of that meeting that we conducted in November 2022, hosted by Peter Bashir, our Ombudsman in New Zealand. And our developments were, as by way of current developments in this paper, I referred to Peter's extensive engagement in the Indo-Pacific as he outlined at our meeting. And he has, if I'm right, Peter, conducted that engagement through the International Ombudsman's Institute and the Australian and Pacific Ombudsman's regional activities in the Pacific Outreach Program. And that included the office holding a 2-day in-person workshop for Ombudsman and integrity institutions in the Pacific region. And the workshop, co-hosted with the Victorian Ombudsman, was supported through a subsidy from the International Ombudsman Institute. So Peter sets a high watermark of engagement, but we're also wanting to explore any future opportunities, which would include, and in no specific order, first identification of regional contacts, who we should contact, and perhaps exchanging contact details. Discussion today of a range of opportunities to engage with our contacts in the Indo-Pacific, identification of the most useful forms of engagement for identified regions, and future commitment to engagement. And that's basically the outline of the paper. If I give some current developments that occurred at lunch today, largely facilitated by input from the Cook Islands, Vanuatu and Fiji, we were looking at opportunities. And I might just hand over to my delegate from Fiji to outline the sort of approach that we discussed, if you're comfortable to do that. And if not, I've got some notes, but it would be good to hear from you on that one. Thank you.
Thank you. I might start, and if I miss anything specific, I'll ask my colleagues to then fill that in. But I think generally we agreed that a current framework that we will use to as an entry point for work around ATI at the regional level is the Pacific 2050 strategy, which is a regional development roadmap recently endorsed by 17 Pacific Island countries leaders in Suva last year, Suva, Fiji, and that there was enough perhaps political will around that. You know, I think there are thematic titles. I think two we directly relate to ATI, and perhaps our opportunities for engaging around ATI at the regional level. We agreed that going through governments, and I know that my colleague from Cook Islands is here, that the Cook Islands government is hosting the meeting of Pacific Islands leaders meeting in, I think, around November this year. And that there was perhaps an opportunity to raise, you know, the issue of ATI strategically around the, perhaps, if not the peripheries, but perhaps, bring that up in the discussions of the leaders when they meet in the Cook Islands. I think that when we, rank ourselves, which we rarely do as Pacific Islanders, because we value the solidarity and the, collective identity that we have, that, Vanuatu leads in terms of implementation at national level, that we recognize that as a unique position and perhaps a leadership position, and Vanuatu, may be able to perhaps place that influence on other governments, particularly on the Fijian government, which has, is perhaps the hub of the region in that sense. But Cook's is perhaps the one in the hot seat this year. We have, so that was the initial discussion, to use the position that Cook Islands has this year in hosting the leaders, but also to explore perhaps a plan B, which is to work through civil society organizations that often organize around the leaders' meetings to bring up issues of concern. There's often spaces that are convened for CSOs to directly converse with the leaders when they meet. So we have that as a plan B. But otherwise, those are perhaps the two options that we have as entry points. And if I've missed anything, I think my colleagues will fill that in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I check in with Cook Islands? Nothing to add, and Vanuatu as the hub for the region. Anything further to add? I think some of the issues around how we might find a home on that agenda for the right to access information will largely be led by the Cook Islands, if I'm understanding correctly, and that perhaps feedback could be coordinated, and that might assist if we look at a contact point in the AIAC, either Peter, who's already highly engaged in that area, Peter, if you're comfortable, that might be an easier way to facilitate communication to the rest of us in the AIAC. So Destiny, would that work for you if you're providing any updates to the agenda and UNESCO, that you also have a contact in Peter? Okay, great. Thank you for taking on that role, Peter. That's great. The plan B, I think plan A sounds like a plan, sounds like a well-developed plan. And some of that might also involve some assistance from UNESCO. One of the suggestions was that we could correspond with UNESCO, who commending this agreement, who then from an Australian perspective, Peter, so it's something that perhaps Catherine and I will take offline, write to UNESCO commending this agreement and the agenda, and then UNESCO may be able to engage with the ambassador located in Paris, the Australian ambassador, because that may well help in supporting our inclusion on the agenda. So that's a takeaway for Catherine and I to work on, I think, as well. So I think we've covered a lot of angles for plan A. Plan B is less well formed, and I thought perhaps just a little bit of time trying to explore how we might engage through either a central point, through independent engagements, through potentially developing our common, this is something we spoke about at lunch, our common requirements and then unique requirements. And those common requirements would apply beyond the reef, as we've so eloquently heard this morning, and across the ditch, which is our expression in Australia. So, so I wonder if we could have a discussion about how we might at least start looking at facilitating those contacts, because I think they're reasonably well developed from an ombudsman perspective. In Australia, we have ombudsmen with that jurisdiction, but generally, as a general indicator, they are the smaller jurisdictions, and they're less able potentially to be able to resource or manage an agenda of this nature within their jurisdictions where they're very stretched as it is. And I say that with utmost respect to those ombudsmen's offices. Does anyone have any view? Catherine has the microphone, I think, very handy. Yeah. But if anyone has any views about how we might communicate more effectively and develop some shared requirements or some individual requirements, I kind of wonder if it's a little bit like a mapping exercise where, you know, Peter's jurisdiction may well be advanced in one particular area and can supply some of the groundwork. Your jurisdiction, or in particular Vanuatu, might also be advanced in particular areas, and we can exchange that, for example. So I'm just wondering how we might bring that together in some kind of cohesive framework.
I might just mention, Joe and I were in a session with the newly formed Asian Alliance, and there, as we walked out the door, there was Chris from the Philippines was very interested to say that he hoped that perhaps the Pacific nations would be interested in maybe potentially joining that group as well. So, you know, I think we need to be mindful that, you know, there's quite a lot of sort of thought about sort of networks that is going on. And, you know, I think we've got a network formally going between Australia and New Zealand, and I think we can act as a support on a number of fronts, is I suppose what I'm trying to say. There's probably, I think, scope for, you know, something that is predominantly focused on the Pacific, because I think probably the regional needs are probably quite unique, but a broader network, you know, perhaps involving the broader Asian regions may be useful as well. So it's probably more than just one as well. But I don't want to complicate things, but I just thought I'd mention that because it was mentioned to me probably about half an hour ago, mentioned to Joe and I as we were walking out.
Do you want me to?
Please.
Look, just a couple of contributions from me. It's quite a special region. It's got some uniqueness about it. And for the purpose of just the few points I make, I'm really talking about the South Pacific and the triangle starting with Palau at the top, PNG to the west of the triangle, the Cook Islands to the east. So when we're talking about the region, everyone will have their own definition, but for me, that's the region that I most concentrate on. So although we have links with Southeast Asia, they tend not to be much related to information and more related to ombudsmanship. The second thing is that there are strong historic relationships, and that's quite unique in the Pacific. It's just that even with Fiji, and you and I had a discussion about this morning, it's of course been up and down, but notwithstanding that, there is that strong bond, and it's something to be used. Elizabeth, I think that there are existing structures and we may as well use them. And by that, I mean APOR, which is the Australasian Pacific Ombudsman region, has been around for a while and it works so well. And that's because there are ombudsmen like Nikki Rattle, who's in your office, that is a resource that's going to be valuable to use. I guess what I'm saying is that with ombudsmanship, it's pretty well established. With information commissioners, some countries have shown an interest, but haven't managed to cement anything in. Why? Well, competing demands. There's not much money in the Pacific. And when it comes to how money is going to be spent, and a lot of it is aid money, then decisions are made as to deployment, and it won't always be in the Information Commissioner role. I do think we're right to use UNDP and UNESCO. There's a heavy presence of UNDP in the Pacific. And I think that's a structure that we should use because the tentacles spread very, very wide. I think just finally, and I imagine my Pacific colleagues know what I mean when I say as follows. I'm suggesting that our job here is to recognise your own sovereignty and not say you ought to do this. This is something you should be thinking about. It's very much up to us to reach out, but particularly with Fiji, it may be that you will go in the direction of having an ombudsman scheme which was abolished some years ago, and it may be that you will move in the direction of an information commission. I've taken the view that we're available and supportive and interested, but we won't do the colonial past like missionaries of arriving and saying, now look here. So I think there's that blend, you know, of us recognising what we've already got. If I just talk about Vanuatu for a second as an example, we're going to sign an MOU with the Vanuatu Ombudsman Scheme in August. It would be simple while I'm there to be discussing information and needs and feeding that back to this group. So those are my suggestions, that we should be careful just how much we bite off, because it's not a wealthy region, whereas Southeast Asia, there's quite a bit of resource and wealth in some of the Southeast Asia ombudsman and information commissions. So those are just my thoughts, which I hope are useful.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a contribution to give a framework to Plan B, which may have a life of its own anyway? If we tap into the Ombudsman's network, then it does have a structure, and the agenda can be informed as you would like it to be informed and fed back through the Ombudsman structure and Peter to the AIIC. Yes.
Sorry, I was going to add that, you know, we had a bit of a discussion before coming here, but, you know, particularly for Fiji, it sounds to me, I mean, I think for us, having done a bit of work as civil society in this work around ETI, that a multi-pronged approach where we're talking about governments, perhaps Vanuatu and Cook Islands leading in that, perhaps that approach, while, you know, a civil society, perhaps even academia, we haven't really gone into that, but civil society is already working in this, but they're working that from a bottoms up sort of approach. And, you know, tagging issues like climate change, which has to do with, you know, survival for some communities might appeal to some leaders. So at least that's what we're trying to do in Fiji. And some of us civil society organizations are connected, you know, across, of course, as a member of the Pacific Islands Association of NGOs, which covers 24 national NGOs. And that's often the sort of the network that we have. They are OEUs when we're, you know, beginning to approach issues that are new, perhaps to government. So I think that when it comes to ATI in the Pacific region and the urgency of some of the issues that we face, that a multi-pronged approach might be needed. So I would suggest that, you know, that we explore that. Don't put your eggs in one basket. Just making sure that you are thinking through other areas of engagement, like talking with Destiny about the youth, the young people who are also interested in this area of work. So, I mean, for me, really, it requires, if it's going to be done in our lifetime, at least, because we also have issues of culture and, that sort of traditional structures that we have to navigate as we're talking about EDI, that the best approach is to have a multi-pronged approach, is to go through government, civil society, and perhaps even other sectors that might begin to become clearer, perhaps in the near future. So if there's experiences in Asia and Africa, and perhaps even in Australia and New Zealand, I know we are already using that, but if there are other experiences that can come and help us bring that sooner rather than later,
right,
would be great.
right.
I mean, I don't know if this is helpful or not, and it's a kind of a lateral brainstorming thought. But I mean, we have the 4 countries which have laws, but then there's a bunch of other countries that are working on it, as it were, and then some others that aren't working on it. I mean, I don't know about all of those countries, but I know, for example, in Samoa, where I did quite a bit of work, in the front end of COVID, they were certainly the policy that I worked with them to develop. I don't know whether it's been adopted actually, but so it took a long time. But I mean, they had identified the ombudsman as the information commissioner role as well. And I suspect that other countries may be looking at that. And I think, as I said in my comments this morning, I think that's probably a practical approach for the region. So I mean, building into this, I forget the name of it exactly, but the Australia, New Zealand, Pacific Ombudsman arrangement, and trying to build more discussion and more elements about access to information. Presumably you have general meetings that discuss all of the ombuds functions, but building more of a discussion about RTI into that, so as to help bring them on board with view to a future role, but also as proponents of this issue within their own societies, because we need to spread these laws more throughout the region. I mean, that could be a way of trying to advance things, even though they don't have a formal role yet, but they can be proponents of the issue, and they can be future not yet designated holders of the post, or something like that, if that makes any sense. I mean, we need to kind of advance the discussion about it more in countries where it's not being discussed enough, or just starting to be discussed, or whatever.
And I think that those 2 perspectives tell us that one, use existing structures because they are effective, but secondly, the notion of as many avenues as we can without exhausting people to maintain that communication. So I'm just trying to think about what it might look like going forward. I think Plan A sounds robust, and we'll hand that over to Destiny, because I think that is really going to be driven. And
Yes, so many.
but the secret is she doesn't like them all. So nor them her. So well, it's a typical family arrangement, isn't it? So that's Plan A. Plan B, largely driven through the contact of Peter engaging with you and then advising the AIAC. And it sounds as though there's also room for something else that might come up less formally in some way. And I guess, oh, no, sorry, I should also say Plan A involves Catherine and I and UNESCO. So there's 3 angles covering off, or 2 angles covering off Plan A, Peter and Plan B. Maybe a subset of Plan B is informal contact and exchange. And I'm hoping that the conference organisers will send out a delegates contact list. I think that they were planning to do that. And if that's the case, we have 3 other jurisdictions in Australia. Well, there are 3, so New South Wales, Western Australia, and Victoria here. And I think I speak for all three of us, given our resolution at the AIC, that we are very happy to receive your contact at any stage in the way that our current alliance association works, which is very much a generous sharing. No jurisdiction leads any others. Each operate quite differently, but we're attracted to the things that we know other people have applied and that work very well. And I guess the observation for me, particularly after now this is my last term and last year, is that those agendas are so shared. We arrive at conferences having read out each other's papers, and we see that we have exactly the same risks associated with curtailment of the right to access information manifesting in each jurisdiction and being managed to different degrees in each jurisdiction. And our power has come from our ability to really grab those pearls and bring them together and adopt a solution that works in our jurisdiction, because we are not the same either. And I think that would be the observation I'd make around the operation of the AIIC. It's characterised by great ideas and an ability to look at how those ideas were implemented and whether they were successful or unsuccessful. So it's characterised by a generosity of thought, but also an ability to be truthful in relation to the outcomes. I think we all will admit a failure and all celebrate a success in a way that gives us, each of us, a form of analysis that allows us to adapt those strategies into our own jurisdictions.
One other, again, lateral thought, and mention that since we're in a kind of a Canadian style environment here, have everybody freezing to death. And since Canada also has some islands in the Pacific Ocean, even though we're not a traditionally, no, just joking. I should also mention, I mean, obviously the civil society angle is very important. I mean, you know, those are natural allies. I mean, some of those groups, and including journalist associations, and some of the key contacts that I've had over the years, and Harold and I go back years on this, and some of the other players, I can't bring the names. Just to mention that there is this organization, FOIAnet, which I am presently the chair, Freedom of Information Advocates Network, which is, you know, a civil society network of organizations that are interested in access to information or the right to information. I honestly don't know whether we have any Pacific Island members. We may, but you know, I don't know all of our members. We have 250 or whatever, but please consider joining. It's a forum for exchange among, you know, and civil society groups, and consider encouraging other civil society groups sort of to bring them more into the general global FOI fold, if you will. I mean, that's a place, you know, if you have questions or we have discussions about whatever on that list and people just put out their things and whatever. So, you know, that's another way of connecting up a little bit. And, you know, we could have a, you know, anyone can launch a discussion. We could have a discussion there about the Pacific if somebody wanted to, or just questions about anything. It's just another way of boosting the issues sort of within the region. So, and then, I mean, and if you're interested, just email me, you know.
the Australian ambassador. So I'm not sure if there is an ability to do that in relation to the New Zealand ambassador as well, or if indeed there's a need, but they were very clear in saying that that engagement is something that would work politically to get it on the agenda.
Just to ambassador to UNESCO.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Sorry.
Yep.
Ambassador to UNESCO. And that would stimulate the agenda, stimulate discussion, and have what UNESCO is looking for, which is high-level political will. Then there's the more practical at Plan B, which Peter, happy to run through it, but please don't, if I'm telling you something you're already clear on, please stop me. That would be to utilise in the first instance you as the primary contact for the region, and potentially then feeding back anything in terms of identified needs or work program that might be shared to the AIAC, and also likewise back to the island states. Is that, sorry, Peter, is there anything? No?
No, that's good.
And the second limb of that is also looking at, so then picked up by the AIIC if there's any components that can be delivered through our engagement. And then thirdly, I think the third limb is the FOIAN, that's it, FOIA, yes. FOIANet. FOIANet. I'd left the ET off the end. So FOIANet, which is a civil society network, and membership of that is open to anyone who would like to join, and that might be a mechanism of engaging with practitioners in this area to build capacity.
And generally just to boost discussion among civil society and engagement of civil society more on this issue.
Yeah.
Just one thought. I had thought that PAF stands for Pacific Island Forum. I thought it was earlier in November, but is it the 23rd, is it?
No, I said November 23 this year.
That's right. I thought it was, is it? That's right. And I can't go to that because I'm involved in Australia in other things. Deborah Glass, your Victorian Ombudsman, has got a speaking slot at Pacific Islands Forum, and I think there's a synergy there where she might well be willing to raise the very issue that you're talking about. There's actually a foot in the door, right, with the Victorian Ombudsman. And part of what we've done, which I think will benefit information commissioners, is New Zealand and was mostly us. We beefed up a UN resolution on the importance of integrity agencies. And what we are trying to do at the Pacific Island Forum is highlight the importance of that resolution, because Pacific Island leaders, if they're members of the UN, now Cook Islands isn't, but that doesn't matter. There's just a door to be opened where what we want as information commissioners could fit quite happily. And the reason, if you follow my tortuous logic, A, there is the Pacific Island Forum, so it is a huge window of opportunity. B, we've already got a foot in the door and a slot. And C, there's enough floating around in this UN resolution to entice Pacific leaders to be interested in information, in the right to information. I think all of that would work.
And Peter, can I ask, one of the other issues that I think we've captured is the relationship between access to information and climate change, and how that might be recognised in our agenda somehow. It's certainly something that Catherine and I discussed ensuring was in the letter, but it might also be another way to galvanise a focus on information access by virtue of issues of climate change.
Very quick observation on that. I mean, it was the environmentalists that pushed the access to information agenda before anybody else, going back to Rio 92 and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, the link between access to environmental activism and access to information goes well beyond sort of just climate change. I mean, the whole environmental movement and things. So I think that's a natural link there.
Yep. Now, I've just been advised that we have 15 minutes left for a discussion. So I'd welcome any final contributions or any more discussion. At the same time, if we feel as though we have a suitable structure to take forward, thank you, Harold. I've always appreciated not on my right-hand side that I can. So if that's the case, we can bring this session to a close. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
When are you going to join Canada as a member of the Pacific Island group?
Yes. SIDS, International Development.